The Democratic Party platform, since I was the McGovern spokesman for Western Pennsylvania, a thankless job. People weren't happy to see me. And I spent time with the candidate and discovered he thought that Henry Wallace had actually been right. It was a disillusioning moment. But if you actually read the platform, and few did, the platform referred 59 times to newly minted rights. For instance, the right to economic security, the right to a decent job, the right to oppose, the right not having arbitrarily high standards on entries for jobs imposed, the right to educational opportunity, health care, housing. It went on and on and on. At the same time, should someone choose not to exercise the right to a good job, the platform insisted on the right to welfare. Now, here was the traditional program of European socialist parties rewritten in the American language of rights. But the platform went further than the Europeans did. In the new dispensation, African Americans were to be protected from whites, women from men, students from teachers, children from parents and family, nature from predatory humans, by an all-encompassing yet benevolently centralized state organized into flying squadrons of civil rights lawyers. And if you think I'm exaggerating, go back and read it. McGovern was defeated. McGovernism, in the form of a vast expansion of government by way of claims against society, triumphed. Last night, we watched a film on school lunches. Not an interesting subject, you might say. But school lunches expand dramatically under Nixon. The new Great Society programs expand. Nixon spends. Nixon doesn't have a clue as to what's going on, as Moynihan begins to realize. When you read the letters, you get a chance that they're worth reading. What comes out of this new world of exorbitant claims against government, which means indirectly claims against society, are a set of interests that begin to define much of American politics. Congressional committees and interest groups allied with the press were active in promoting environmental scares. Federal regulatory agencies such as the EEOC inserts itself into institutional hiring decisions. There was a time when I was a professor, thank God I'm not anymore, when every year we had our visit from the EEOC people. We just went through Tucson. The idea that mental patients really weren't mentally ill, but that they were victims of state oppression, that's this period. What happened is that government became not just far larger, but far more pervasive. One other big thing about Nixon. Public sector unions are not opposed by anyone at this point. The Labor Secretary, Nixon's Labor Secretary, whose name is escaping me, I'm sorry, comes out of the public sector labor, he supports them. No one is opposing them. I'll come back to public sector unions. In the 1970s, the public sector unions became a political venue for new leftists, feminists, and black activists, hoping to carry on in the spirit of the 60s. With the old party machineries in decline, public sector unions became the machinery of the Democratic Party, ever more so over the years. Here in New York, everyone knows. How many people are curious are from New York? Those of you who know the Working Families Party. The New York Working Families Party is the functioning core of this. The other great or important thing that happens in the 70s is the surge in government's regulatory power. Overshadowed by Vietnam, this too goes largely unnoticed. Before the 60s, government regulation was aimed at specific industries. But with the creation of the EEOC, the Environmental Protection Agency, the Consumer Product Safety Board, and the vastly expanded product powers of the FTC, Federal Trade Commission, government went through an enormous growth of its regulatory powers. The upshot, in the words of David Vogel, who wrote best on this in his book Fluctuating Fortunes, was that no other capitalist nation had established such extensive controls over business decisions. In the left liberal political world of the 1970s and 80s, the world that produced the McGovern platform, the world that Obama would join, it was capitalism, not communism, that was on its last legs. One of the great joys of being a young person at that age was debates on late capitalism, and the legitimation crisis. How much longer did late capitalism have? Well, the welfare state of Western Europe and the U.S. was said to be suffering from lack of legitimacy. Euro-communism was on the rise. Daniel Patrick Moynihan, who I unfortunately didn't get to meet until a few years later, in a mournful moment said, "Liberal democracy is a holdover form of government. It has no relevance for the future. It's where the world was, not where the world is going." In America, the conflict between capitalists and their critics, which in Europe meant battling about socialism, although not so much anymore, became in America a clash between competing and hostile elites. The new class and its lawyers, Ivy League trained public interest lawyers, against their corporate counterparts. That doesn't really change until 1980. I'm going to stop at roughly around 1980. Because the Reagan election is a dividing line. In that context, the line between left liberals and radicals was effaced. This is my old friend Michael Harrington talking now. If one examines the official positions of the ADA, Americans for Democratic Action, or the New Democratic Coalition, NDC here in New York, and examines their principles, they are, Harrington argued, for the redistribution of wealth, government intervention on behalf of the poor and minorities and working people, and for the extension of public ownership of all sorts of enterprises. And he concludes, they are seen to be socialist in all respects save one. They do not mention socialism. Moynihan, looking this over in 1980, says, "Oh my God, here's the future." I'm quoting him now. There's a movement, he said, to turn the Republicans into populists, a party of the people arrayed against the Democratic Party of the state. That's exactly what's happened. That's something that Telos talked a lot about in the intervening years. Today, with government spending in the U.S. arriving at roughly the same percentages of GDP as most of Western Europe, the already blurry lines between liberalism and socialism, understood not as state ownership, rather governmental control over the commanding heights of society, have been progressively effaced. Just a brief and I hope completely unpolemical comment about President Obama in regard to this. President Obama, with his upper middle class social style, if you remember, at the beginning of the campaign, he was the upper middle class candidate, not the African American candidate. President Obama, with upper middle class social style and his multicultural roots, is in his person the embodiment of contemporary liberalism. But he's also the embodiment of contemporary liberalism in the sense that he grew up in politics as an ally of the public sector unions and their organizational offshoots like Acorn. He was a professor preaching a rights-based liberalism. In that sense, he is a stunning representative of the evolution of the changes I've described. So whether Obama is described as a liberal or a socialist is by now of relatively little import. Liberalism and socialism, regardless of the political maneuverings of the moment, have been reconciled into an American version of centralized European statism. And that's it.